Are you living the swank life? It's cool, it's classy, it's cutting edge. It's everything you want out of life. If you want more dates, more fun, and a better lifestyle, it's time to raise the bar and start living the swank life.
Hey guys, welcome to the SwankLife Show, where we talk about dating, entertainment, and lifestyle. This is your host, Jake Swank, and we've got a great show for you today. Be sure to visit the website at SwankLife.com. Take advantage of our blog, our special offers. We got all kinds of great stuff for you there to enhance your lifestyle in many, many ways. So, SwankLife.com, go check it out. My pleasure to welcome Frank Kermit to the show. FrankTalks.com is his website, and he is going to talk to us today about relationships, about seduction, about all kinds of stuff so that we can have more success in the game of love. Frank, welcome.
Thank you, Jake. It's great to be here.
Hey, it's great to have you. So tell us your story as to how you got started in this field. I always find those stories to be interesting, of the different guys that teach this kind of stuff, and girls, actually, not just guys.
Well, you got to understand, I never got into the study of seduction and relationships to be a teacher, to be a guru, or anything of that nature. I got into this because I was stood up at my prom, lost my ex-fiancée to my best friend, and then finally I spent 2 years with a girl just as friends because she insisted we could never date because we were of different religions and cultures and so on. And after 2 years of hanging out with her, she announces to me that she's getting married to a guy who's of a different religion, race, and culture.
That's not
and
good.
I was beside myself, and I said, why? What did he do that I didn't do? Why him and not me? And her response was, I didn't plan it. It just happened. He seduced me. And at that moment, I decided, okay, well, fine, I'm going to become a seducer now, because what I'm doing obviously isn't working. In every relationship or attempt at a relationship that I was in that did not work out, there was one common element: me.
Right, exactly. I think that's the common element for all of us, Frank.
Exactly. So if your love life sucks, there's one common element in every relationship that you've attempted, and that's you. So if you're going to fix your love life, you got to start by working on you and coming to terms with what it is that you're doing that's sabotage.
So I assume that when you say you, of course you're very right about that, and I couldn't agree more. You're really talking first about inner game, aren't you, Frank?
Exactly. And the way I define inner game is the elimination of your hypocrisies. Each of us in life goes through life with some hypocrisies, where we may say that we want one thing, but we respond to another. When you want to clear up your inner game, it means you're clearing up all the hypocrisies. Because once you eliminate your own personal hypocrisies, that is when you can truly be a whole person that knows what he stands for, knows what he wants, and you are finally in a position to actually get it.
Now, that's the first trainer in this field, if you will, I've heard say that. Eliminate your own hypocrisies. Tell us more.
Okay, let's choose a very specific example. On the one hand, a guy's going to say that he wants a girl who will sleep with him right away on the first date. He doesn't want to play games. He just wants to get to it. And why aren't girls more open to that? And all he'll do is complain. However, that same guy, when he actually gets a girl to sleep with him on the first date, what do most guys do? He turns around and he insults her. He turns around and has a low opinion of her. Well, that's a hypocrisy. If you want women to actually be intimate with you, then you have to be in support of a woman wanting to be intimate. And if you're going to turn around and bash her because she's doing something that you initially responded to, you got to come to terms with why you're being a hypocrite in that case.
So how does one do that? That's a really interesting point. I've never heard anyone say that. So I can see that it needs to be done, and someone needs to rethink the way they hold her, their view of her. How do they do that? Is there a technique for that, or are you just saying you got to do that?
No. I mean, there's a specific technique we go through. I'm going to give you some very specific things that anybody listening right now can do right now. Start off by writing exactly what it is you want, and then for each one, write down every time you've responded to the opposite. So on the one hand, you're saying, I really want to marry a nice girl. Well, if that's the case, why are you pursuing a girl that wouldn't be in line with the type of woman that you would want to marry down the road?
Not the one you're going to bring home to mom, huh?
Exactly. And if you've ever been asked out by a nice girl, and believe me, this has happened to a lot of guys where the type of girl that they're looking for, that nice girl, the one they can trust, the one that's going to be sweet and treat them well, if that type of girl shows an interest in you, and you turn around and say, well, I wasn't really into her, she wasn't hot enough, enough. I wasn't really turned on by her. That's a hypocrisy. And this is what you got to come to terms with. How you fix that is that you set behaviors in place so that even when you don't feel like doing something, you still go through with the behavior anyway, because you're trying to create a new repeating behavior pattern. Once you get that new habit, it becomes part of your instinct.
That's really good. Is there more on inner game, though? I assume when you say inner game, you're going to say things like confidence and dealing with approach anxiety, that kind of stuff. That's what most of the people in the field say.
Well, when I look at confidence, I always define confidence as a result. Because the idea of, well, just be confident and you'll attract a woman. Speaking as a guy who came from a really bad background where I was completely unsuccessful with women, you've heard the fact I got stood up on my prom. You heard the fact that I lost my ex-fiancée to my best friend. How the heck am I going to have confidence with women if that's the type of history I have? You're not supposed to wait until you feel confident before you do something. You're supposed to do it anyway, even if you don't feel confident, because confidence is a result. Once you do the action, you get a result, you learn. Confidence comes from learning, and the more you learn, the more success will come to you long term. In the short term, you're not going to be successful, and it's arrogant to think that you're just, you can just go ahead and be successful anyway. It's a pipe dream. Your goal is to learn as much as you can, because as you're learning, you gain confidence about what you know. Confidence is a result.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I certainly find that that's true in the field of career and so forth as well, and athletics or anything like that. So inner game. Then we move, maybe if you're kind of looking at this in a chronological fashion, we move to seduction, approaching, succeeding, or maybe even before that, we want to talk about like just general dating and social life, like increasing those two, turning up the volume on those things in one's life. Either way, you can take it where you want.
Okay, let's move on to the next step. The next step at that point is figuring out, once you start eliminating your hypocrisies, you have to start looking at the ways you behave that either are going to make you a likable person or that are going to turn people off from you. And in most cases, it's about calibration. How do you learn to calibrate? Calibration is about putting people into categories and modifying your behaviors to those categories without crossing your own personal values. What that means, if I get into a situation where, let's say it's a work environment, everybody that I'm dealing with in that work environment is a certain category. They are coworkers. There are certain behaviors that you will and will not do with coworkers. If you behave in an uncalibrated manner, making sexual jokes with coworkers, which is a big no-no, you're going to come off as an uncalibrated person and an unattractive person. If, however, you can modify your behaviors and say, well, I'm dealing with coworkers now, I'm going to behave in a professional, friendly, I can still be attractive, but I'm not necessarily going to make sexual jokes on the job. That element of calibration, that ability to modify your behaviors based on the category of the people you're dealing with, will translate into being attractive. Now, when you're dealing with calibration, this is one of the hardest things to learn, because if you were initially really bad with your love life, chances are you probably were really bad at socializing. When everybody knows you and says you're a great guy, you're a good friend, but not one girl in all of those social circles doesn't want to date you, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, no question about it.
Okay, as much as you're a great guy, as much as everybody says, wow, you're such a wonderful human being, look at two things. Number one, do any of the women you know that call you a great guy want to date you? If the answer is no, you move on to the second element. Does everybody who thinks you're a great guy want to set you up with a girl? If the answer is no, once again, then as great as the guy you are, and as much as people like you, they don't respect you.
Right, and a lot of that sounds like sort of the friend zone problem as well. A lot of women thinking you're a great guy out there, but they don't want to date you. They don't want to be in a relationship with you necessarily. It's sort of that syndrome too, that friend zone syndrome as well.
That's exactly it. Now, in my body of work, I call the friend zone guy the emotional cookie man.
Emotional cookie man, okay. What is that?
The emotional cookie man, because it's based on the story of the little girl who goes up to the adult and says, can I please have a cookie? Because if I get the cookie, I'll love you forever, and I'll be nice, and I'll clean my room. And she says all of these wonderful things. What happens when the adult gives the little girl her cookie? She gets her cookie. She says, thank you. She immediately turns around. The smile is gone from her face. She enjoys the cookie. But all those promises, all of that nice attention that she showered on the adult is gone. Not one promise is going to be followed up with. This is what happens with guys who become the emotional cookie man. They get all of this attention from a girl. They go and they shower her with all kinds of prizes and gifts. But the bottom line is, as much as that girl likes the guy, she doesn't respect him because he allows himself to be taken advantage of. As a man, it's more important to be respected than it is to be liked, because a woman will be friends with the guys that she likes. She will get intimate with the men that she respects.
Absolutely.
That's why a woman will go out with a guy that she doesn't like. That is exactly why a woman will go out with a guy that she says, I can't stand him, I hate him, he's such a jerk. But why is she intimate with him? Because she respects him.
It's a funny thing, and a lot of guys just struggle with that all their lives. They just don't get that. They can't wrap their head around that one. Go on. So dating, social life, seduction.
Okay, now when we get into the world of seduction, this is where you become such a seductive person. Your personality and the way you communicate becomes so attractive. This is where you can go into the experimental phase, figuring out what type of relationships you really want. Now, you got to understand, it's great to intellectualize, oh, I know that I want this type of marriage or this type of monogamous relationship or this type of open relationship. And it's all fine and dandy to speculate. Can you really handle it? There are guys who like to talk about, having an open relationship with all kinds of wild adventures. How many of those guys, when they actually get into that situation, can really handle it? Look at the classic, what's every man's fantasy? To be with multiple women at the same time. How many of those guys can really handle it if they see their girlfriend kiss another girl?
Yeah, right. They'll get jealous. Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden they get jealous. They start feeling insecure. Well, wait a minute. Does that mean that she's going to leave me for a girl? Does that mean that, she likes her more than she likes me? And then they start freaking out. Sounds great on paper. Sounds great in theory. But in the practice of it, can you really handle it? This is part of the world of seduction where you're going to try all of these different relationships. In my own history, I went from having no sex for 5 years to having 5 girlfriends and lovers at the same time.
Well, that's another interesting thing that you talk about. You've got a product on that, and I love the name of it, Multiple Women Management. Just love that name. Tell us about that. I mean, how do you pull that one off?
The reason I came out with that particular lecture is that I never believed in lying to women, because as far as I'm concerned, once you start lying to women, you got to lie to protect the lie, to cover up the lie. I just don't have time for that. I don't have the memory skills for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you. There's a famous quote, I think it was Lincoln or something that said it, or maybe Washington. If you always tell the truth, you don't have to have a good memory.
Yeah, and he's right. It's right. So when I started doing multiple women management, the idea was I want to be able to date as many women as I can, but to do so in an ethical fashion. And in dating many women at the same time, there were certain pitfalls that kept coming up. For example, what happens when Valentine's Day comes around and you're dating more than one woman? Who do you spend Valentine's Day with? How do you prioritize? Something else that was going to happen, let's say, again, if using the example of Valentine's Day, if you're dating 2 or 3 women at the same time, but you're casually dating them, chances are once Valentine's Day comes around, all of them will dump you at the same time because they have the chance to have a more serious relationship with someone else. These are the types of things that program covers to prepare you.
There are different sorts of structures that relationships have. Tell us what your view is as to some of the different kinds and types of relationship structures out there.
Well, for the first thing I want to say about that, no relationship structure is better than any other structure. They're just different. It really irks me when people are against monogamy and think that non-monogamy is the way to go because of all the bad things that monogamy offers. It really irks me when people say that monogamy is better because of all the horrible things of non-monogamy. One is not better than the other. They're just different. Where people mess up is that they don't understand that the rules of monogamy are different from the rules of non-monogamy. So let's start with monogamy as a relationship structure. There's 2 main rules for monogamy. Rule number 1, you don't have sex with anybody else. That's a pretty standard rule. Everybody seems to know that when it comes to monogamy.
Yeah, I think that rule's about 2,500 years old or so people are pretty familiar with that idea.
There you go. Now, here's the second rule of monogamy where most people screw up. Rule of monogamy number 2, you never do anything that would even potentially threaten rule number 1. This is why monogamy is so difficult for some people to practice. Because they get rule number 1, don't have sex with another person. What they forget is they do things that threaten the potentially threatened rule number one. So they'll innocently go out and spend some quiet time with a person that, well, they're sort of attracted to, but no, they'll never go down that road. They'll never make any decisions to be unfaithful. The fact is, most affairs and most people who go down the road of monogamy don't plan to have affairs. Most affairs aren't planned. They, quote-unquote, just happen. Part of being in a monogamous relationship structure is that you don't entertain those possible temptations. And it isn't because of your commitment to the other person. It's your commitment to the idea of commitment. It's your commitment to the monogamy. So let's say you have a girlfriend, and you get invited to go to an event, and your girlfriend cannot go with you. And at this event, there's going to be lots of opportunity for you to meet and hook up with someone else. Do you go to that event?
Well, you got to resist the temptation.
Well, are you saying the person should go to and resist the temptation?
It depends, I'd say, firstly, on that person's level of self-control. But the first point is don't put yourself in the situation.
Exactly, because if you're in a committed monogamous relationship, your commitment to monogamy is what you're aiming for. So you wouldn't even put yourself in a situation where the temptation is there. Now, let's say the guy goes to this party anyway, and he resists the temptation. He doesn't do anything. If their relationship has any other areas where they're weak, or they're having a hard time communicating, or maybe they're just both under stress, maybe one of them has an ill parent, maybe there's something else going on in the relationships, and at that moment, any shred of doubt that relationship has will manifest itself in, did you do anything at that party? This is why you don't do anything that would threaten the monogamy. Now, if you can't handle that, don't be monogamous. Don't make a commitment. Don't make a promise that you don't intend to keep or you're going to have a hard time keeping. Now, let's look at non-monogamy. In a non-monogamous relationship structure, you never put an unreasonable expectation on the other person you're dating. One of the ethics that I teach when dating or in seduction or in relationships is that every person has the right to find their soulmate without interference. That is a fundamental belief I have. When you date someone and you have the expectation that they're not allowed to date anybody else, but you have no intention of building a future with that person, in my opinion, that is unethical. They should be allowed to date anybody else they want while they're dating you if you have no intention of building something long-term for the future with that person.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that's not the way it really works in most cases in love. It's kind of like a lot of this stuff reminds me, Frank, of that old saying, all's fair in love and war. It's kind of brutal out there sometimes. You want to mention any ways to read that? I certainly get it from the listener's side that they shouldn't do that, but what if someone's doing it to you?
Okay, well, give me an example of somebody doing it to you.
Maybe you're with someone and you really like them, and she's not that into you, and she's sort of wasting your time. Usually it's the other way around. Usually the guys are wasting the girls' time just because of the age situation and the biological clock and so forth.
Well, if someone's wasting your time, meaning that they don't intend to build a future with you and you're staying committed to them, you can't blame the other person. You're the one who's choosing to stick around when there's no future being built or promised.
Oh, no, I understand that, but I'm saying, what if you don't know?
Well, what if you don't know? That's all the more reason that you continue to date openly. You commit once you know, once you have an inkling that, wow, I want to build a future with this person. But until you get that absolute decision, you need to keep your options open and to date other people. Most people end up in relationships by default. There's nobody else who's into me. This person seems to like me. Okay, what? This person says they'll only date me if I'll be monogamous? Okay, I'll be monogamous. One of the rules of monogamy that's in my program on how to make monogamy work is that if you're going to be monogamous, you spend as much time as you can with that person to figure out if you want a future with them. And as soon as you figure out that you don't want a future with them, end the relationship, move on to the next person if you want the monogamous lifestyle.
I mean, are we talking just two relationship structures here, or do you have a whole bunch of them you want to talk about?
Well, under non-monogamy, you have everything from casually dating a number of people at the same time to polyamorous relationships where you have serious relationships with multiple people at the same time. You could have the swinger lifestyle where you're dealing with mostly married couples who like to have recreational sex with other couples and singles. That falls under the umbrella of non-monogamy. With each relationship you get into, it's a negotiation. One of the reasons that monogamy is so popular is that the rules are pretty easy. There's less rules. It's very easy. You don't have sex with anybody else. and you don't put yourself on the path of temptation. The rules are simple.
I agree. I mean, some of these other lifestyles, that kind of blows me away. I would think there would be so much resentment and jealousy and all those types of, that's just crazy. I mean,
I'm going to disagree with you here.
Really?
I'm going to disagree with you only because I've actually experienced all this. Here's what I can tell you. The jealousy and the resentment happens in monogamy as well. And the primary reason that happens is because in monogamy, all your eggs are in one basket. You have invested so much into this one other person that any potential threat to the monogamy, and you're dealing with resentment, and, well, I'm giving up the opportunity to do all these things to make this work, so you better be there, and you better be everything I need. And that's an unreasonable expectation. When you have an open relationship, a non-monogamous relationship, everything is a negotiation. So yeah, it is more work. But because it's a negotiation, if there's ever something you're unhappy with, you can actually talk about trying to find a way to incorporate it or fix the problem.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way before. But this actually leads into kind of one of your main areas of work, one of your main bodies of work, which is emotional needs. And I think that's a perfect segue. So why don't you talk about that a bit? I mean, what do listeners need to know about her emotions, your emotions, kind of managing one's emotion, because at the end of the day, we're all such emotional creatures. I mean, we might give lip service to logic and we'll rationalize things with logic, but we act based on emotion, I say.
Exactly. Emotional needs are the emotional motivations for why we choose to do things and why we respond to things even if we don't choose it. An emotional need doesn't mean necessarily that if you do this, I'll respond in that way. That's very logical thinking. Emotional needs is about what a person responds to, not necessarily what they like. This explains why some people stay in very emotionally unhealthy relationships. Why would they stay in bad relationships? Because as bad as that relationship is, on some level, it addresses that person's particular emotional needs. Now, if you can understand that, you can understand why people get into bad relationships and stay in bad relationships. So let's choose a very common example of this. Let's say the relationship is abusive, where both partners are abusing each other, whether it be emotional, mental, verbal, physical. It could be the gamut, a combination of all these abuses. But yet sometimes people keep going back to those relationships. Now, this does not make logical sense. Does it make sense that you would want to build a life with someone who beats you? Does it make sense that you want to build a life with someone who cheats on you? Does it make sense that you want to build a life with someone who berates you and belittles you?
Or nags you?
Well, when nagging is done to an excessive degree, that's abuse.
Well, that's a good point.
Okay, now, nagging, let's be clear here. I mean, everybody is going to get nagged at some point because that's just the nature of life, especially when she has her mothering instinct and, you're doing your thing and she's not doing it to nag you. She's got her mothering instinct that's full blown, and that's your job to halt it so that she stops being your mother and starts feeling like your lover. That's part of my emotional needs theories. However, if the nagging is so persistent where it starts getting verbally abusive, that's abuse. That's not just nagging. So when I'm talking abuse, I'm not talking about just abuse from the man to the woman, which is where everybody just automatically assumes is the case. There are relationships where the woman is the abuser, but because it's not physical abuse, it's not given the same level of attention. If you study any lifespan development courses, you'll learn that the main abusers of all children are women, not men.
That's amazing. That's really surprising to me.
Well, think about it. Most women are the ones who spend time with the children, so they have the majority of the access.
They're around.
When a man abuses children, usually it's something physical. It could be sexual abuse, physical violence. But when a woman abuses children, not only can it be sexual and physical, we just don't hear about it very much, but it can also be verbal and mental, emotional.
Certainly.
So abuse is gender irrelevant. Maybe that's not the right terminology, but one gender is not necessarily less violent than another. Both genders have the same capacity for abuse, just different types of abuse. Now, why would somebody in an abusive relationship keep going back? Because for that person, as bad as that relationship is, it addresses their particular set of emotional needs. It's what the person responds to, not necessarily what they would like.
Yeah, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense from the outside, but it makes sense when you say it that way. What else about emotional needs should people know?
Okay, now men and women respond to emotional needs differently. We test for emotional needs differently. For a woman, it comes down to her mothering instinct. In my philosophy, she's either your mother or she's your lover. She cannot be both. Anybody who's listening to this right now, let's say you've been in a long-term relationship, maybe you're married, and your long-term partner, she's just not attracted to you the way she was when you first started dating. Chances are that when you first started dating, Every time the mothering instinct kicked in, you halted it. Every time she says that she's going to do something, or she tells you, oh, don't forget your sweater, don't forget your scarf, you would say something like, stop, you're not my mother. Be quiet, I don't want to hear it. I'm a man, I'll take care of it, thank you. The halt of the mothering instinct is what turns her on. That's when she starts to feel like your lover.
Oh, and when you let her do it, though, then the passion goes away from the relationship, doesn't it? That's really interesting.
Exactly. Now, what happens in a long-term relationship, especially in those relationships that have children? Her mothering instinct is constantly on. Now, for a guy, it's very different. And if you can understand this, you'll understand how some relationships start great and go bad. A guy looks at women and says, she's either my ally or she's my enemy. The more she acts like an ally, the more he will find trust in her. The more she acts like an enemy, the less he will trust her. A guy doesn't base his commitment on what a girl looks like and whatnot. Some guys do, but they need to develop. A guy will base his commitment on whether or not he can trust a woman. A woman will base her commitment on a man with how he makes her feel and how he leads her. So here's what happens in a long-term relationship. Her mothering instinct is constantly going. He sees her mothering instinct sometimes as, oh, she's my ally. She's trying to help me. She's trying to encourage me. She's being a good ally. So he lets a lot of that stuff go over the long term of the relationship, not realizing that that's exactly what's turning her off from him. That's why one day she says, I'm fed up and I'm happy, I'm miserable. And he says, I never saw this coming. Because in his mind, she was being a good ally. So the advice that I give to all men is halt the mothering instinct. If it's something you can do for yourself, tell her. Bug her off. You're not my mother. Stop. The 3 sexiest words that any man could ever say in a relationship. Stop mothering me. Those are the 3 sexiest words.
That is so surprising because in a long-term committed relationship, it would seem like you're letting her do her thing. You're letting her take care of you sometimes. When you're sick, for example. I mean, people take care of each other in a relationship. That's the whole point, right?
That's different.
Yeah, okay.
That's different.
All right.
That's different. Well, emotional need number 3 of men is, can she mind the store? If ever he is incapacitated, he's unconscious, or he's sick, can she step in and take care of things? That's okay. But when he's not sick, when he doesn't need her to take care of him, that's when he has to say, okay, I'm well again and I'm going to lead this relationship. Stop mothering me. It's her job to mother their children. But if he lets her mother him in the process, that relationship is on its last legs.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. What else?
When you address a woman's emotional needs, she ends up feeling special and is more prone to feeling like your lover. This can lead anything from her to have sex with you to her to want to have your children and be committed to you. For a man, even if she addresses some of his emotional needs, his willingness to have sex with her is not a sign that he's going to commit to her. The act of sex for a man is an emotional need. We get oxytocin released in the brain when we have sex or long embraces. Those are the only 2 times that a man can enjoy oxytocin in the brain. A woman can get oxytocin in the brain not just from sex, not just from long embraces, but from a variety of things. From having a stimulating conversation where she feels a sense of emotional connectedness, she can get oxytocin in the brain. Doesn't work that way for a man. Where men are sometimes very stupid, a man will have sex with a woman he still deems as an enemy. A woman, however, when she has sex with a man, it is the most efficient way of addressing the majority, if not all, of her particular emotional needs. That's why in, let's say, a casual sex relationship with a man and a woman, where they just get together and have sex once in a while, she is more likely to fall in love with him, not because the sex is great. The sex could be mediocre, but because the act of sex for a woman is an efficient way to address her emotional needs. Whereas a man is less likely to fall in love with the woman he's having sex with, because even if the sex is amazing, it still only addresses one of his emotional needs and not enough that would make him commit.
Very, very interesting points, Well, hey, Frank, where can people learn more about your work?
If you want to learn about my coaching, about my books, about my CD programs, you go to franktalks.com. franktalks.com. Everything you ever wanted to know about me is at franktalks.com.
Excellent point. Well, Frank, you've got a radio show, you've got some...
This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company, all rights reserved. For publication rights and media interviews, please visit www.hartmanmedia.com or email media@hartmanmedia.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate professional if you require individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and the host is acting on behalf of the Hartman Media Company exclusively.